Well, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order this Committee of the Whole meeting for the town of Saugeen Shores and extend a welcome to everyone in the chambers this evening. The first order of business is a declaration of pecuniary interest, and I'll remind every member of your responsibility to do so. None declared. Then the next item is additions, deletions, or amendments to the agenda, and we have nothing under that. And item 4 is delegations. This evening we have 2 delegations, and the first is Mr. Fred Kuntz. He's here, and Lise Morton. I don't see Lise, but he's here, OPG, an update on projects. Welcome, Mr. Kuntz.
Testing, there we go. Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, councillors, for this opportunity to update council and the community on OPG's activities here in this community. I'm going to just speak to a very short agenda. First, I'll update you on what's happening with the Western Waste Management Facility in our community, then what's going on with the Deep Geologic Repository, how OPG is collaborating with Bruce Power on a number of fronts, and a couple of other minor updates I'd like to present. So moving to the first item. So the Western Waste Management Facility is within the fence at the Bruce nuclear site, and that's where we accept, process, and store nuclear waste from the Bruce plant itself, and also the low and intermediate level waste from the other nuclear reactors that OPG runs. We applied for a license renewal because the current license expired, or the previous license expired just this past May, and there were hearings in April in Ottawa at the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, and based on our case that we made for our excellent safety record and our plans for the next 10 years to build on that record, they granted us another 10-year license. We were the first nuclear facility ever in Canada to get a 10-year license, and so we're proud to have renewed it again. So basically it allows us to continue operations as they exist. It's not for the DGR, it's strictly for this current existing facility. We'll have to add new buildings as time goes on, and buildings that require additional regulatory or licensing approval will have to get approved at those times through this 10-year period. Next, I'd like to talk about the Deep Geologic Repository, or DGR. I know you're all quite familiar with the project. I'll just recap that in 2015, the Joint Review Panel recommended that the environmental assessment be approved by the federal minister and that be built now rather than later. But there was an election, there was a new minister, and the new minister had some additional questions for us last year, asking us to look at alternate locations and some other studies. And we did those studies. We submitted them in December. The study of alternate locations found that a DGR could be built elsewhere in the Canadian Shield or Southern Ontario, but with more environmental impacts, largely because you have to truck 100,000 cubic meters of waste that's already stored at the Bruce site to the alternate location. You have to build in a greenfield site, a new nuclear facility. That all costs money, and it could delay this project by 15 to 20 years or more. We also looked at the cumulative effects of the 2 GGRs, the other one being the proposed DGR for high-level waste or fuel, and found no cumulative effects. I just want to dwell on the 2 DGRs point for a minute in anticipation of other possible presentations this evening. Some people ask, why do you need 2 DGRs? And there are really a few reasons. One is it's so legislated. The federal statute in 2002, the Nuclear Waste Act, mandated the creation of the new Nuclear Waste Management Organization, which is looking for a solution for all of Canada for used fuel, whereas the generating stations have to deal with their own low and intermediate fuel. So we're operating within that statutory framework. Secondly, Kincardine, which is the host community for our DGR, has expressly stated, and we've agreed with them in writing, that this DGR will not accept high-level waste or used fuel. But thirdly, and this is probably the most important reason, they require different technical solutions, different engineering solutions. Used fuel has different thermal conditions, it's hotter, you need to handle it with more automated equipment. It's a different kind of DGR, it's a different design. So at the surface you could share a parking lot, and you could share a lunchroom possibly, but below the ground there will always be 2 different DGRs. So those are the chief reasons. So where are we in the process? After we submitted those studies last year, the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency held a period of public comment this spring. And the public commented, Indigenous groups had their own comment period with the government, And in addition, several other federal departments from Health Canada to Fisheries and Oceans and the CNSC and Natural Resources Canada all looked at it for 47 days. And naturally, they all had questions. So the agency put the key questions to us in April, and we promised to respond by May 26th, which we did, and our responses are now posted online. The agency is just reviewing that, and if they have the information they need, then they're going to write a report to the minister this summer. And there will be another period of public comment on that report. So 2 periods of public comment, one after we submitted and another one on the report they write based on our submission. Then, after that public comment period, the final report will go to the minister, and the minister is expected to make a decision on the environmental assessment by the end of this year. That doesn't end the process there. That doesn't mean shovels in the ground. There are many other stages still to come, more approvals. We still have 2 more years of work to do in design and engineering. We're still discussing this with the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. We require their support. And then eventually there's construction, but even after that, then we'll have to apply for an operating license. There'll be more public hearings. It's going to be a decade before this is in service. I want to talk about OPG and Bruce Power because we all know that Bruce Power is very important to the economic prosperity of this community. They employ 4,500 people. They've got their $13 billion refurbishment project coming up. They're encouraging companies involved in that refurbishment to locate here. We see the Rolls-Royce office, more are coming. OPG and Bruce Power increasingly are working closer together on many fronts. One is the production of cobalt-60, which is for medical sterilization, medical use. We do that through our CANDU reactors, so we work together on that. Another is refurbishments. We have our own refurbishment going at Darlington, and Bruce Power is watching that very closely and working with us so that they can learn from that for their upcoming project. Here's the DGR. Bruce Power, once it saw the process unfold and saw the recommendations, the review from the joint panel, the recommendation, the federal process, they felt confident that it had been proven scientifically to be a good solution, and they wrote a letter of support to the federal minister in March of this year. We, of course, deliver nuclear waste services to Bruce Power, as I mentioned earlier. And then finally, OPG owns the Bruce site. We lease it to them. We're the landlord. They're the tenant. So on all these fronts, we work very well together. There is a picture of our 2 CEOs who have a long history together. They've worked together in the U.S. Prior to both coming to Canada. It's a very good relationship, and we're proud of it. A couple of other brief updates. One is that refurbishment that I mentioned at Darlington. That is Canada's largest clean energy project. It's a $12 billion project. It's going to provide clean energy for the next 30 years. And it's on time and on budget, so we're happy with the way that's going. But it's early days, of course. We've got another 10 years to go on that. And then I want to talk about the government's new Fair Hydro Act legislation recently tabled, not yet passed. That is intended to provide immediate rate relief to Ontario electricity customers. Now, OPG is already a low-cost provider. We get 6.5 cents a kilowatt hour, and if you look at your bill, it's double that. It's not OPG's nuclear power. It's a lot of other policy decisions and reasons that have gone into that. But we're nevertheless going to be key in providing the solution to customers who want rate relief. We're going to be the key financing player in deferring the long-term costs of energy investments and enabling that rate to come down significantly in the near future. So that is my brief update. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Fred. Any questions for Mr. Coutts? Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the presentation, Fred. I have a couple of quick questions. One is following up on a concern that I had from the original report that you submitted in January, and that's also following up to your statement about no cumulative effects from having 2 DGRs in the same region. I didn't see in the January report a discussion of the possibility of having overlapping. Well, one of the things that that report said is that there was, I think, a 24 to 30 year overlapping possibility if there was an APM DGR in South Bruce, Huron-Kinloss, or Central Huron, there'd be like a 30-year overlapping period of time of operations. And right now, I think that report said that OPG has like 800 annual shipments per year from Darlington and Pickering to the Western Waste Management Facility?
Yeah, a few shipments a week. It probably adds up to close to that.
Yes.
I don't know the exact number, but I think you're right.
And so my question at the time, my concern at the time was if you have this overlapping period of operations of 30 years, and you have an API, used fuel DGR operating in our region, there are only so many roads that you can use from points east, Point Lepreau, Darlington, Pickering, to this APM DGR if it's located in our region. And so my concern is that I didn't see a discussion of the possible cumulative effects of that overlapping transportation. You know, the increased risk that you've acknowledged would be a problem with alternative sites. And so I wondered if you could comment on those concerns.
All right, so cumulative effects and risks on transportation for two DGRs. So during the joint review panel, there were presentations and discussions of the potential cumulative effects of two DGRs, and the 2016 study asked us to elaborate on that. And so we elaborated, but the cumulative effects were deemed to be negligible because of the distance between the two DGRs, so that from the operation of the two DGRs, they're separated by sufficient distance, even if it's in one of the three municipalities you mentioned, that there are no environmental effects. In terms of transportation, though, it was pointed out that the reason the Bruce site is a preferred site is because there's fewer transportations. If the site where the waste is stored now, the low and intermediate, stays on site, it's only moved 100 meters, and so it's not transported on public roadways. The impact of transportation of used fuel to the new APM DGR, that would be part of the environmental assessment of that DGR, not of OPG's DGR.
Yeah, I understand that.
But in terms of the risk, just to put risk in context, yes, OPG said if the low and intermediate level waste goes to another alternate location, there is an increased risk from transportation, from handling, and so on. But to put that in perspective, 22,000 additional shipments, risk of something like 3 to 8 collisions, all of them caused by the other driver, based on our past experience, and none of them resulting in any fatalities or any release of radiation to the public. That's based on 40 years of experience, because when you look at the public roadways today, it's hard to imagine anything safer going on our roads than transportation of nuclear waste. It's highly regulated. The trucks, the packages are extremely robust. They're designed to be dropped off a 10-story building and survive intact. Our drivers undergo multiple training sessions and repeated training sessions. We monitor the movements of all those trucks that are required to stay within speed limits and so on. Sometimes what happens is somebody will be texting and drive into the back of our truck, and then their car is damaged. But our activities are very safe. There's never been an accident resulting in any radiation release or any injury to any driver or any member of the public over 40 years and 3 million kilometers of nuclear waste shipments. And so the risk is slightly increased, but it's very low.
Well, I'm grateful for that record, obviously, but I'm just concerned about the fact that I didn't see a discussion of that 30-year overlapping time period. Let me ask if I may, one other question. I saw a recent CTV News report about the First Nations Water Walk place over the last couple of weeks, and there was an interview, I think, with Shirley John, who's one of the elders for Son, and she was talking about, at least for some members of the community, at this point they believe that enhanced surface storage would be superior to a DGR. So my question is OPG conducting some new research exploring that? I know you've looked at other countries, but are you doing anything new in terms of responding to that interest on the part of CIS?
Because of our 2013 commitment to the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, we have ongoing and respectful dialogue with Saugeen Ojibwe Nation on these and other issues too, legacy issues. They weren't consulted at the beginning of all of the development of nuclear facilities in their traditional territory. So there's a lot of history there, a lot to talk about. It's a good discussion. It's ongoing. In terms of what some members may feel or not, it's not for us to say. It's not for me to say what the San thinks. It's up to the San to do that, and they'll do that in their own time and in their own way. They haven't yet declared what their process is going to be, whether it's a referendum or how they're going to obtain the expression of their community voice. But we await that with interest. So I can't really speak to what some members think. We give tours. We gave 6 last year, and we've got more scheduled this year to Saugeen Ojibwe members. I've met many of them. I've heard a variety of opinions expressed. In terms of how others store waste at surface, you will find around the world low-level waste, and in some European countries like France, they also classify very low-level waste stored at surface. But for intermediate-level waste and high-level waste, international consensus is a deep geologic repository. Nobody is recommending that intermediate-level waste, which can be radioactive for 100,000 years and requires shielding, nobody is recommending that be stored at surface. The safest thing, the best thing to do with that is to put it in a deep geologic repository.
So does that mean that you're not exploring new research on enhanced surface storage?
OPG looks all the time at innovation. We have an engineering division that, of course, part of their mandate is to constantly be innovative and be at the cutting edge of technology. So our eyes and ears are open to developments around the world. We're very interested in everything that goes on. And new innovations around the world that have an impact on the way we do things and can make us better is something we're always interested in.
Thank you.
Any further questions? I see none, so thanks very much, Mr. Koontz.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next delegation then is John Mann, and he's here to talk about the procedural bylaw. Welcome, Mr. Mann.
Thank you, Mayor. I just initially want to note my T-shirt here. Ralph Hornsby became recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award here in town. It's a wonderful honor for him. If you can't find it at Ralph's, you don't need it. So I think the world of Ralph, so it's a great thing that was accomplished there. I'm just asking council to repeal the bylaw that limits citizens from giving to or a delegation more than once in 6 months. I would have done a delegation regarding what Mr. Koontz talked about today, which couldn't have been done till right now in any event. So I don't think it fit the bylaw, but the bylaw prohibited that. So I'm just asking, I think citizens have the fundamental right to communicate with their council, particularly in this forum, and that bylaw violates that, and asking the council to repeal it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. Any questions for Mr. Mann? I see Councillor Dave Mayap.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. Perhaps the question should go to the Deputy Clerk, but I believe that the bylaw limits, as you say, speaking to council on the same topic within 6 months, but it also says that unless the item is on the agenda. So in the case of tonight, you could have spoken to...
Only in the open forum.
On the open forum.
Only in the open forum. You would have 3 minutes if you registered prior to the meeting. You would get an opportunity to speak to it.
So if the item appears on the agenda, and it's an item that you had previously spoken to within the last 6 months, you would be available to speak to it then. So it's not quite as prohibitive as you're making out.
Except the 3-minute forum doesn't get videotaped for some inexplicable reason. Can somebody explain that? Why the 3-minute is not videotaped? Apparently, council isn't even aware of that.
It's not part of the meeting. It's an open forum. The meeting doesn't start till 7:30, and that's when we start meeting.
But citizens come, particularly to give a 3-minute presentation. They take the time out of their day to do that, and it's not even televised. Is something going to be done about that? Again, I'm asking for the...
We don't minute it either.
I see no comment. So is there any other questions for Mr. Mann? If not, thanks very much, John.
Thank you, Aaron.
Yes, thank you. The next item on the agenda is a general government staff report, and it has to do with the police services building, and I believe our CAO is going to present.
Yes, thank you much, Mr. Mayor, and through you. This report is a follow-up to the direction that Council gave during the budget process when Council was responding to a request from the Police Services Board for budget funding for a new building. At that time, there was some consideration for a joint facility with the regional EMS service. However, that option is no longer on the table. Staff, through a third-party consultant, verified and validated at a high level, as outlined in the report, the projected costs of a new build versus a renovation. Staff did not validate the need for additional space. The projected costs have come in very closely between the new build and the renovation, and thus the decision on a new build and a renovation is less driven by cost. And if Council decides to proceed with one of these options, the decision is more driven by other factors, some of which are outlined in the report. In the long run, if Council is prepared to make the decision, a new build makes the most sense in most of the criteria. I've not validated the need for new space or for more space through a space planning consultant or records management review or anything like that. Thus can't speak to the need, but would direct any need questions the next steps, if the process goes forward, would be for a report back to Council in the next month or so with more specific project approach and timelines. I suspect we will be also recommending hiring a project manager with expertise in building police buildings. That cost is included in the proposed estimates. I've also included some building background general material that I thought may be helpful to Council. Happy to answer any questions or for the...
Okay, I'll take... There's a couple options in the recommendation here, and I suspect I'm not... What we'll do is perhaps take any questions first so we can kind of get a consensus around what options we're likely to support, and we'll get to the recommendation then. So is there any questions or comments on what David has or the report we have? Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just curious as to the timeline that's unfolding in terms of the recruitment and hiring of a new police chief. What's the anticipated timeline on that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Chief of Police is scheduled to retire at the end of October, and so we're working towards having a replacement in place in advance of that date, well, far enough in advance so that we can have a reasonable transition, and we are well on the way to achieving that goal. In fact, we are ahead of schedule, I think, in terms of goal. So we should have a new chief late in the fall.
Councillor Dave Mayatt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to the CAO for putting this report together and presenting it. One of the items in here, and obviously I'm a member of the Police Services Board, for those that don't know, and I was on the subcommittee of the Police Services Board that came up with the recommendations that were to pursue a new build. One of the deciding factors, which isn't necessarily explicit in this report, which I think is worth noting, and it actually relates to an information report that we're going to see later today about the availability of leasing town space to a myriad of new businesses and contractors and people that are coming to town looking for office space, that to pursue a new build means that we still have the old building, and the old building is got 6,000 square feet and garage space that I think is in a prime location and a prime spot that it could create a revenue source for us, for a company that's looking to relocate to the area. So that's something that I think needs to be weighed into the conversation and kept in the forefront when we come up to make this decision, and I will be supporting what we did support last time, which is the new build option. Thank you.
Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is if the current building is, if we went ahead with a separate new build, and the $600,000 that's projected for renovation that would be required for reuse of the current police building, either for municipal expansion or leasing, is that $600,000 included in the 0.8 million?
Through you, no, it's not included. And corresponding with that is there's an opportunity for about $100,000 in annual rent, if not leased out to the group.
Councillor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What I didn't see was the projections on parking spaces, total parking spaces lost to from municipal. So we have a joint police building and municipal complex and the Plex arena itself, and we're envisioning the new pool aquatic center as well. And so I was wondering if we could see the future parking plan with these two new developments integrated, albeit we're going to, if we support the new build at another location, that means that this current property would either be sold or would be leased to other users, and they would expect to have some control over their environment and their parking area. So I was wondering what the total number of parking spots lost and gained and how we're going to manage that is going to be if we turn this building over to lease opportunities in concert with the future development of a pool aquatic center in this space that we've got here, existing versus future.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure if I can answer that exactly, Councillor Minaj. When we looked at the overall footprint of a renovated building, it does go up 2 stories, so the impact to the existing parking would be minimal. So that would be if we did a renovation here. And there is a little bit of a push out or a bump out, but that's generally where there's grass area outside the front of the building. If there was a new building and we leased the space out, the current space out to a third party, there would need to be some accommodation for parking. My experience, though, is that when our peak parking demands are not usually when an office space would be used. So that would be something we would need to negotiate with anybody that was leasing the space.
Councillor Mike Myatt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have just a couple of comments and then a few questions if someone want to write them down. I recall this building when Police Services Board first talking about costing was $5.5 million, and I see now we're at 6.8, which doesn't at all surprise me. And capital projects tend to do that, where we start at a number and those costs do go up. I dare say it may be, in my view, maybe it would be much higher than 6.8, but who knows? One of the questions I have is I was a promoter on several occasions of entertaining the idea of partnering with Bruce County for joint emergency service for ambulance service and police services on Bruce County lands. And I read in the report where Bruce County has since met and decided that the lands aren't large enough. At the library lands on the corner of I guess it's Concession 10 and Godrich Street, Highway 21. So the question I have, Mr. Mayor, one of the questions I have is that pretty much a dead issue in terms of having police services tied in with Bruce County Ambulance? Is that the end of discussion? Is it still a possibility that they could take another look at the land they have on Bruce County lands, or is it definitely too small? Or can we reopen conversation, dialogue with the county, talk about ambulance service being in the industrial park if it's a new build? That was one of the questions I had.
We answer that one right now. How we will answer that one right now?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor, for all intents and purposes, the discussion of a joint project with the county is finished. Something could change in future. I think both areas or both property owners are thinking, why would I lease forever across the road from property I own? And that's certainly what they have expressed. And I included in the report the direction from the committee to county staff. From our perspective, the space is too small for us to build a police building there. And again, I think I'm not sure it would be prudent to lease space across the road from property you own.
Next question relates to later on the agenda. I think it might be a regular council meeting. We have a report coming forth, a letter from Saugeen First Nations Chief Aniquet, talking about police servicing out at Saugeen First Nations. And I'd just like to hear a comment, not to put the cart before the horse, but would the space requirements for a new or renovated building be impacted in any way, shape, or form if we in fact provided servicing to Saugeen First Nations, or would the headquarters, would there be a building be built out at Saugeen First Nations at their cost? I just want to know what impact it has on our plans for space.
I think it's impossible to comment on that, Mike, because I think we don't know where those negotiations, if they start. I'll be honest with you, we've already had some discussions with both the chief and the Met administrator. They approached us, so we asked them to, but that's why that letter's on the agenda tonight. So it's really kind of premature to say that it's either going to go one way or the other. We can discuss that other part when we go, but I think we need to stay focused. You know, it may be part of the discussion, and if it is, I think it'll come around quick enough that we'll be able to modify hopefully we would get an answer quick enough to modify that solution, answer your question, if it is a demand.
And hopefully not at our cost, but maybe Luke, our Deputy Mayor, did we even comment on that, Luke?
Just, a couple of things. To that point, and the Mayor is quite right, and I have participated with him in those discussions, and they've been good discussions. One important point to note that we have pointed out, something that we have noted to the officials from Saugeen First Nations, and something they've been receptive to, is the need for any servicing out on Saugeen First Nation to be revenue neutral to the town of Saugeen Shores. And so I think that if you're looking ahead to concerns about what that might cost Saugeen Shores or what the impact might be, I think that's an important thing to bear in mind, is that that's sort of one of the pretexts of the discussion we've already been having.
Thank you.
On the, I wanted to make a correction because I was in error. I misspoke when I answered the Vice Deputy Mayor's question. The Chief's retirement date is November the 30th, not the 1st of November. Just, I didn't want to get in the wrong on that, so it's the 30th of November. And I guess I just take this opportunity to comment to the resolution as well, Mr. Mayor. Oh, sorry, Mike. I apologize. Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Apologize.
But I just, to you, Mr. Mayor, to our CEO, the third-party consultant, Mr. CEO, David, do you have full confidence in the third-party consultant's price of $6.7 million for an expansion renovation versus a new build of $6.8, which is $100,000 difference? Do you have full confidence in that consultant and in that report?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, I have every confidence. It's a large project management company, Colliers. They build police stations, hundreds and hundreds of projects. The cost, I did ask them to build in an inflationary amount for 2018. If we go through the tender process and the build is actually in 18, there is an inflationary cost built in. Having said that, I did put in the report that this is a high level, I think it's a Class D estimate, so that this isn't a budget, this is an estimate, and there's a number of steps that need to go through. I have great confidence in their work.
Thank you, Dave. And just to comment on that, I was, again, a big promoter of really further researching in detail renovation expansion, which at one point I thought was $2 or $3 million lower from a year or so ago. But very hard for me to not support this recommendation for a new build based on a $100,000 difference. My final question, Mr. Mayor, to you, to CEO again, is a new build. We're looking at 12,000 square feet, and there's probably a very simple answer for this. And the renovation expansion is 14,800 square feet. Could you explain to me why there's 2,300 square feet additional with the renovation expansion?
I can speak very generally about that. And generally with a new build, you have a much more effective design. You're not trying to incorporate existing things that you've got to work around and build around. So it's much more efficient for a new build rather than trying to accommodate existing structures.
Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I can another partial reason for that difference in square footage is that the renovation option requires the addition of a second story onto the existing building, and the build out of that second story. Rather, you could build it to match the square footage, but if you're going up anyway, it doesn't make sense to put the elevator in and just build that small square footage. It makes sense to build the rest of it. So that's part of the reason why there's that difference. I guess obviously I support option one. The Saugeen Shores Police Services Board supports option one. The Saugeen Shores Police Service supports option one. Just to reiterate, that recommendation comes as a result of a number of years of work by the Police Services Board at doing designs, working with architects, working with the entire service. And I think it's very important to be clear that the chief has gone through many years of consulting with staff inside that facility in terms of what is necessary, what is needed, and what design is required in order to accommodate the service in the way it ought to and needs to be accommodated. And so that process has gone on for many years. Obviously, as you'll all recall, we had a fairly extensive public consultation process last year, including the striking of a committee, which included members of the public, members of the Police Association, and the entire Police Services Board, as well as police administrators. And this is the recommendation that we have arrived at. And so now we've reached this point, and we have an excellent report from the CAO, which shows us that in terms of an order of magnitude, the two options are virtually the same. I think the overall numbers are less important at this stage, since they are plus or minus 20 to 25%. So I think we're still at a point where the ultimate cost is fairly unclear. But what is clear is that the two projects, or the two types of projects, are virtually the same in terms of cost. And I think that's even true if you extrapolate out all of the extended costs, like the cost of losing a lot in the industrial park against the gain of potentially being able to rent the facility, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that when we boil that down, when we distill that down, and we see that the two projects are very similar in terms of cost, and then we add on top of that the recommendation from your board and from the service and from the members of the public who were involved in that process, I think the right option to pursue to the next phase is the building of a new building on a municipally owned lot in the Port Elgin Business Park. So I would encourage council to support that option, and hopefully we will get more answers to a lot of these questions that we still have, and there are still some good questions that we do not have answers to. But I think the CAO has done an excellent job of laying out how a good process of getting to the point of answering those questions can work, and we should work through that process, and I'm certainly supportive of that, and I know the Police Services Board is as well. And I will also say that the board is very eager to work with council in whatever capacity it can to facilitate this process. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to get some clarification on the very last two paragraphs in the report about the financial impact. It's one of the first times, perhaps the first time I can recall seeing a report that says that the project be funded using a levy approach. I'm assuming that that is very similar to debt financing, because it would appear from the way that it's written, it would be a 20-year payout for the cost, and the number that's here is $63 per year for the average property for 20 years. So is there, I have a second question too, but it's just I don't recall seeing in a financing thing this levy approach. Is that the same thing as debt financed over a 20-year period? Is it meaning the same thing, or is there some other thing that I'm missing in that description?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and the terminology may be the same, it may be a little bit different. I'll articulate what my intent was, is that the town would borrow the money to complete the project, and in addition to the regular tax, a levy would be applied for a period of time, and when that debt was paid, the levy would drop off.
So that would be, through you, that would be similar to what, sort of similar to what we've done with the waste management added little thing on there, but that's a set amount per property. This would somehow be adjusted based on the assessed value of a property. That's why you say the average property is $63. Would that be fair?
Yes. The second part, I'm not exactly sure about the waste management, but the second part, yes, it would be weighted to the assessment, and it would be identified as such, the intent of the use of that levy, and when that debt was paid off, the levy would stop.
Okay, then my second question is, to be fair to taxpayers, I would hope that the next time, perhaps when we see something about this sort of thing, that we have perhaps a little more complete financial picture. This is one area of the police services situation in Saugeen Shores that we actually have some control over, because it's a big ticket item in the budget, but it's mostly salaries and that sort of thing, which is outside our realm of authority. Anyway, I'm just, the line there, a larger police building will have increased demands on the operating budget. I think there's a place in this conversation to have a little more complete financial picture. Thank you for explaining that. I didn't understand that from what I read. So certainly somebody's tax bill, operating stuff would fit in there. What I heard you say was that we would borrow money, and then the payback on that would be an additional item on somebody's tax bill. I'm just curious to know what would the debt cost be over 20 years? Is that going to push the $6.7 or $8 million up by $1 million? Just because this is an interesting way of looking at this, and I appreciate this because I've thought that this is something we should explore for some bigger ticket items. So I'm encouraged to see this here. But I just think that to be fair to residents, we should have a little bit more sort of complete picture of the financial thing with police services over a period of time, because I think that will be a healthy discussion, but it also will show perhaps for some people it's good value for the money, and if we don't think it is, we can have that discussion then. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the questions, and through you, Mr. Mayor, I comment a couple of things. Number one is the Director of Finance sent a report to Council on our debt limits and outlined how much the borrowing would cost over time. I can certainly recirculate that to members of Council. I don't have it here, so I don't want to speak specifically onto that, but that information was included in that report, I believe. So we'll certainly circulate that to members of Council. In terms of the overall, I would remind Council that this report is a result of the budget meeting, and the budget meeting is when we talk about the full cost of police services or the full cost of fire services, and we would do that every year as part of the budget. Certainly if the Vice Deputy Mayor would like more information on the cost of overall police services, we could accommodate that, but typically that's done annually as part of the budget reporting.
Any further questions or comments? Councillor Mike Myatt.
I just asked one more question through you to CAO. Then, David, could we at some point if this project is debt financed to the tune of 6.5, 7 million, whatever the number is, over the 20 years, could we, as a council, receive from you what room we have for future debt load room for future capital projects? And I just want to put a plug in for a new pool here in this community eventually, and I'm just wondering if what room we still have with our debt load room.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I'm happy to do that again. All of that was outlined in the recent report from the Director of Finance. Sure, happy to do that.
Councillor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I guess I'm asking those who are intimately knowledgeable about police work that this has taken quite a while, and it's going to still take several years to get this determination correct. Are we confident that we now know all of the potential downloading, policing issues that could demand an increase in size? Why do I say that? Because somebody made a decision many years ago to build something that was undersized by 50%. What I wouldn't want to do, and I would like to support this project, I would like to support it knowing that we have done everything we possibly can to be sure that the space is adequate for future growth and future downloading of policing issues, where be it if the Ontario Provincial Police doesn't work as cooperatively tomorrow as they do today with us for whatever political reason, and they say you need to look after this new division of policing, that we've got it covered with this new building. How can we get that assurance?
I think what you can. I don't know how to answer that question properly. You really you're trying to ask me to read the future. You have no idea what the next provincial government will do about policing. I suspect the currently, I know, and the chair can speak to this, we have a very good relationship with Ontario Provincial Police, and that's province-wide an understanding. And if you go to OPP pricing, I'll often say I think about 40% of it is operations that where they provided and funded by the local community. 60% of it is funded from the province through all of us, so that we pay for a lot of the OPP services that we get. We pay for those who are. That could change, I suspect, at any time, but I suspect that the board, and again I'll leave it to them, has put a great deal of thought into this, to the needs that this community has to provide the policing service that this community has and into the future. And I'll let the board chair speak to it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with the mayor. I can't speak to the future, but what I can say is that what is before you, the design that has been considered and has been formed the basis for what you're looking at here tonight, it is the view of the Chief of Police and is the view of the board that this facility will be adequate to our needs today, and more importantly, adequate to our needs well into the future. There's a strong knowledge that we do not want to go through all this and go through a construction process and this large expense and be back here in 4 or 5 years saying it's inadequate. We're very cognizant, and that we don't want to wind up in that situation. So that is the position of the chief and the board. But like the mayor said, what happens in the future? Anything can happen. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so I guess we need any other further questions or comments to this. Is there a consensus that option 1 is the preferred option? Can I have a show of hands? Option 2. So I'll read it as option 1, and then I'll ask the question. It's recommended the council provide direction to staff to pursue. It's recommended the council provide direction to staff to build. I don't know how I'm going to read that. Build a new building on the municipally owned land in the Port Elgin Business Park. Second, that staff report back on the proposed project methodology, timeline, and initial project budget in consultation with the Police Services Board. and that council authorize staff to spend up to $20,000 funded for the future project budget to assist in the next steps. Any questions of this? I think there's been some pretty good discussion around financing and our debt financing ability, and I think if you can bring that back in the report. Okay. Any further questions? All in favor? Opposed, if anything? That's carried. So, the next item on the agenda is Environmental Services and Transportation Staff Report. It has to do with the total station purchase, and I believe Jessica, no? Amanda is going to present.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the purchase of a new total station was approved in the capital budget with a cost of $37,500. We solicited 3 bids for this product. Total station is a one-man survey instrument, if that makes it easier to understand what this thing does. So we can send one of our staff out and he surveys the land on his own, brings the information back and creates survey plans. It also allows them to do layout for our contractors. So both of those things save money by having them done in-house. So we received 3 quotes. One was for an instrument called a Focus 35. It was for $34,000 and change. A Trimble S5 was $39,000, and another supplier of the Trimble S5 was at $35,000. So the Trimble is the same manufacturer as the ones that we use today, and so they can speak to each other clearly, and our staff are familiar with that product. Cancel also provided a price for us just for interest of a Trimble S7. It is one step above the S5 and one step below their top model of an S9. It provides additional service such as 3D scanning and has better long-range accuracy. So that means Ryan has to move the machine less times on a bigger site. So we are at council tonight asking to get approval to buy the S7 instead of the S5 because the S7 is outside the approved budget. We looked at where we would fund that. The original proposal to fund the total station was broken into tax, water reserve, and wastewater reserve. So if we continue with that 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 split, we would be looking at trying to raise another $2,100 from somewhere so that it wouldn't affect the taxes. And that can come out of our pre-engineering budget, which has also been approved in the capital budget. To date, we've spent to date, we've spent 0 of the $20,000 for 2017, and last year we only spent $12,000 of the $20,000 budgeted for 2016. So with that, I recommend that council endorse the purchase of the Trimble S7 for use for engineering staff.
Thank you, Amanda. So I'll read the recommendation that council of the town of Saugeen Shores approve the purchase of the robotics total station for the use of engineering staff to perform topographical surveys and construction layout. Questions, comments? All in favor? Very good. It's carried. Next item on the agenda is the staff report. It has to do with our parking bylaw 51/2013 amendment. And again, our Director of Public Works will present.
So staff had been asked to look at parking along McVicker Street around between Stephen and North Shore. There's currently parking on both sides of the road allowed. It's a narrow right-of-way, narrow asphalt, and a lot of the boaters with large boats and trailers are now using that section of street to come up Concession 10 instead of coming up Market Street because of the weight and the grade on Market Street. So when you combine that with our new trolley stop, the increased use of pedestrians and cyclists along North Shore, and the parking for the community mailbox, the splash pad is there as well, and just the use in that area, we looked at how we could accommodate the traffic flow with parking. So we propose to change it so that there's no parking on the north side and a section of no parking on the south side. In that no parking area, the line on the diagram I showed is larger than it will be. It's flexible to accommodate where the trolley stop goes. The limits are on the north side would be from North Shore to where McVicker comes into.
Excuse me, and thank you, Amanda. The recommendation is that council considers an amendment to the parking bylaw at the next council meeting to include the changes described in this report below. Councillor Madison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, Amanda, how is this going to affect parking for the splash pad?
There is a parking lot at the splash pad location currently. There's a gravel parking lot there right in front of the community mailbox. There's also parking allowed along Stevens Street by the playground that's there as well. So there's a hope that there is not any impact on the parking for that. It also, by having the parking changed before the splash pad is put into service, then there's the intention or the knowledge right from the get-go of where the parking's allowed, instead of putting no parking in a year after the splash pad being in.
Okay, we'll start with Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you. Just following along that line of thinking, the gravel parking lot that you're talking about that's on McVicker, I'm curious to know, do we need to make any parking bylaw amendments which would set out that a couple of those spots are handicap spots, or was mentioned during one of the meetings that some would be signed for community mailbox users? Is the intention to, I think there's 10 spots there, I could be wrong, but is there something that we need to put in place that sets out that a couple of those are handicap spots, or are they already signed that way?
They are not currently signed that way, and I'm not aware of the needs. On site plans, there is a requirement that a certain percentage is to be barrier-free, but I'm not sure how it works in a non-lined, non-signed. Look that up and come back to you after I talk to Jay.
I can also address that. As part of our planning, our initial planning, it was designated that there would be a spot that would be permittable for short-term parking for the use of the mailbox and additional parking for accessibility.
Councillor Minaj.
This is one of those days, one of those reports where I wished I'd had more time and I didn't, and so I'm going to bore you with it now. To me, it seems like the tail's wagging the dog here with these large boats and their boat owners, and in the decision that they need to go a certain route in our community. Are we saying that the North Shore Road is a better suited and equipped road to get to the 10th concession? Is it a designated road that is suitable for a large boat and trailer? Is that what you're saying here? Because I'm not sure I agree. How much road allowance is there on either side of McVicker and Stevens Street that the current, not that I want to get in the face of the local property owners, trust me, but we know that it's a narrower road, so what kind of road allowance is there? Should we be expanding that road if in fact that's the route that you want to take? I support your recommendation. I just feel like we're missing some pieces here. And when you introduce the topic, Amanda, and you say that people have come to you and said that they have a problem driving their boat up Market Street Hill or the Green Street Hill or the Mill Street Hill or the Elgin Street Hill, but they really want to go up the 10th Concession Hill, I wonder who those people are. And finally, I guess I'm going to ask that we have Jane on record saying that she would like to reevaluate that whole access, where the train goes, where the trail goes, and where the roadway goes into the boat harbor parking area. And I wondered if this is a little bit early. Like I said to you already, and I said to council, I agree with the no parking signs for now, but I think there's an opportunity here for two departments to sit together and figure out just what is the best answer, and I feel like this is a makeshift answer. That's where I'm headed with this. Thank you.
I can comment to it, and I think I will. I think you're jumping way ahead of the horse here. We're just talking about parking. We're not talking about Elgin Street Hill or Green Street Hill or any hills or where people can go. We're talking about parking, and let's try and focus on that. If there's a bigger issue, then there's a way of raising that. But it's kind of unfair to pop these questions on them when that's not on the agenda at all, and isn't what we're speaking to.
Please let me finish.
Please let me finish. I'm in the chair here, Neil. So I think we'll stick to the recommendation that we have here. Councillor Dave Myatt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. Parking is one of those issues that is bound to create opposite feelings. Some people will be happy about it. Some people are not going to be happy about it. The people that live along that north shore of McVicar Road, I'm getting the feeling that they were displeased about the location of the splash pad because they thought it was going to create a parking nightmare when the hordes of children and their parents and their strollers come descending on North Shore Park, and this may be something that they'd be in favor of, but they also may be something that they don't like because maybe they like having visitors or tenants, people that can park freely wherever they want to go. I think the boats is a bit of a red herring. I'm not sure that that's as big an issue as it might be, but the trolley is a bigger issue, and the trolley is mentioned in there, and the trolley I know from personal experience with one of the trolley drivers, who shall remain unnamed at this moment, that area is congested and difficult to maneuver around at times, and that this would be a solution. So I would support this, but I do expect that we will be hearing more about it, and I'm sure it's not the last we've heard of it in the public forum. Thank you.
Councillor Mike Myatt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just through you to the Director of Community Services, Jane. The Lions Club picnic shelter is used a fair amount. At least the Sundays I go by, seems to be a fair number of picnics there, and I see, some good numbers of people parked on both sides. So, by removing the parking on the north side, do you see, obviously there's some impact because we're losing so many spaces. What does it do to those users? I guess it just means parking a block or two away and walking a little further, correct? Is that simple as that?
Correct. Yeah, and if I can share a little bit more information with you, the decision to eliminate parking on the north side was a collaborative decision amongst all of the directors, and more specifically in consultation with our fire services who had concerns when that pavilion was used and that parking was on both sides. It reduced sight lines, and we are aware that there's many people that are maneuvering in between out of cars. Obviously, the boat maneuverability is also a concern, and we know more and more pedestrians are coming down Market Street and Green Street. So there was a collaboration of all of those aspects to eliminate the parking on the north side of Stephen Street.
Mr. Mayor, did senior management team, Jane, and your team talk at all about if parking is removed of putting in a marked bike lane on the north side by any chance? Was there any discussion about that?
Certainly those are some long-term goals that we'd like to see, but we also know that there is still parking capacity further south along Harbour Street that is not utilized to its full capacity. So as much as people are wanting to park as closely as they can to the pavilion right now, there is opportunity further south that cars can be parked.
I'm just referring to bikes, the bike lane, but there's been a little bit of discussion about that.
There's certainly been discussion in regards to getting cyclists through North Shore Park and more specifically safely around the parking lot on North Shore of the harbour.
I think the CIO would like to speak.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to point out in the report, it does note that special event parking may be considered when events are hosted at the pavilion and will be dealt with as part of the special event requests. So if we're having a large event at the pavilion that may need extra parking, as part of that special event, we may be granting special event parking.
Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to come back to the little parking pad that's there. The Director of Community Services did say that there was an intention to have a limited short-term space, and then she called them accessible spaces. I'm assuming that means handicap spaces. That would require an amendment to the parking bylaw in order for those to be signed appropriately. So is it possible perhaps to have that amendment added on to this so that, we can, because I appreciate what the Director of Public Works said about it, better to put this all in place before, something else happens. So, because in order to put a sign up, we need to have a revision to the bylaw. So is that possible tonight?
Do you want to speak to it, Amanda?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I can adjust the recommendation for when it goes to council next week, that it'll include signage to allow short-term parking at the community mailbox and one signed wheelchair accessible space.
Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Mayor, I'm generally not super supportive of new prohibitions like this, but I'll go with you on this one. Could you just, since we're talking about signs, how many new no parking signs are going to be required in this location as a result of this decision? Any idea?
The Highway Act says you have to put one no parking sign it's either 50 or 80 meters, and I just left a meeting about the roundabout in pro parking, so I can't remember which is which. It might be as close as every 50 meters.
50 meters is quite a good distance then. That's because if you look at some of our other no parking decisions, like if you go along, just to draw one, Waterloo Street and Port Elgin, they're like about every 40 feet apart. So if 50 meters, I'm not so upset about that. That seems pretty reasonable. I would just, if we can come up with a standard like that, could you please apply it everywhere? Maybe we could go back to Waterloo and you could pluck out every 4 or 5 of them. Would be nice. Anyway, that's good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, any further questions, comments? All in favor of the recommendation as amended? Opposed? That's carried. Item on the agenda then is the staff report to do with the Fairy Lake Trail, and our Director of Community Services, Jane, will present.
Thank you. At a previous Committee of the Whole meeting, Vice Deputy Mayor Huber presented a motion regarding Fairy Lake to Council outlining several requests. A majority of the requests were operational in nature and have been recognized and placed on work orders and addressed by staff. From that motion, REACT further discussed the specific request to eliminate cyclists off the Fairy Lake Trail. After a lengthy discussion, REACT agreed to the recommendation to eliminate the cyclists. At that time, staff expressed their concerns with the concept, and they've been included in the report this evening. Some of the concerns in removing cyclists from the Fairy Lake Trail include expectations of bylaw enforcement. And the bylaw enforcement is critical during prime summer months, and historically those resources have been focused on higher traffic locations, including downtown cores and main beaches. The municipality has recently been critiqued as a bicycle-friendly community, and based on those recommendations and opportunities to provide bike safety within the community. We feel that educating users of trail etiquette would provide life lessons for all users. Utilizing the trail by bicycles provides an alternative means for cyclists to access other areas of the community by not traveling on the roadways. Having one park that is designated to exclude cyclists on a trail is putting it inconsistent with other parks that we have that do have trail systems, such as Perkins Park, George Marion Park, and Nodwell Park, just to name a few. And the newly established trail at Fairy Lake provides an opportunity for cyclists and pedestrians to share the trail in a safe setting. Excuse me. As part of the report to this evening, I've given you several photographs and pictures of signs that are existing in other communities that promote shared trails and usages and etiquette as well. In the interim step, staff is recommending that cyclists and pedestrians continue to use the trail in unison, and that staff erect signage indicating that it's a shared trail, and further that we undertake a media blitz to educate users on trail etiquette. Staff will monitor the usage to determine if this is the overall approach. As far as the financial impact, the impact would merely be signage entering into the entrance points of Fairy Lake.
Thank you, Jane. So the recommendation is that Council endorse staff's recommendation to promote Fairy Lake Trail as a shared usage, and that a campaign and suggested signage be erected educating cyclists to disembark when approaching pedestrians. Comments, questions? Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do not support the recommendation of promoting cycling on this trail. One of the arguments put forward by the staff report is that we are trying to become a designated bike-friendly community. And so I looked up some information on bicycle-friendly communities in Ontario. There are 36 right now, just to see if any of them have said that there are some parks that are walking only. So the town of Pelham and Niagara has a silver designation, as the only two gold are Ottawa and Toronto. So Pelham has a silver designation. They have at least one park, which is a walking-only passive park, the Harold S. Bradshaw Memorial Park. The town of Newmarket, which is a bronze designated bicycle-friendly community, actually has this instruction on its town park's website, and I quote, "When enjoying the trails, please respect signs indicating that some trails are reserved for foot traffic. If you are cycling or blading, please stay on the main cycling trail and return another time on foot to use the hiking trails." So what I'm saying here is that this town of Newmarket, has preserved some trails as walking only, and that doesn't seem to have impeded the town's ability to maintain its status as an official bicycle-friendly community. I'm also the council representative on our accessibility committee. 2 years ago, in the fall of 2015, 5 members of our committee walked around the trail because it was our understanding that one of the main goals of the project was to promote and increase accessibility around Fairy Lake. We recommended a number of improvements, but at that time we recommended that cycling not be permitted. And we reiterated that recommendation in our accessibility committee meeting last week. And I think, I understand the concept of advertising trail etiquette, educating people to be respectful, but in reality, that doesn't seem to work all the time. And I think that, for instance, on our beach boardwalk, there are a number of complaints. I just heard one today about somebody walking on the beach boardwalk, and it's not even summer, just last week, and somebody riding their bike and ringing their bell and saying, "Get out of the way." I don't think that we need Fairy Lake to be included in that cycling mix. We have wonderful cycling trails. We have wonderful multi-use trails. We have the rail trail. We have the shoreline trail. I don't think we need the Fairy Lake Trail to be included as a bicycle, to include bicycles. One other point that was made in the report as an argument in favor of this is that it would allow cyclists an alternative to cycling on streets. And Victoria Street, which would be the normal route to take, is very wide. There's plenty of room for bikes and cars there. And it seems like that argument is almost promoting the trail as a bicycle bypass, which I think undermines the atmosphere of Fairy Lake as a reflective and slower paced park where users can observe nature quietly. So I will not support the recommendation to include cycling. Thank you.
Councillor Madison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too will not be supporting this motion. Council designated that the Active Transportation Committee make a decision on this several meetings ago. It came to Active Transportation, and it was decided at that meeting that we designate Fairy Lake as a walking pathway. Fairy Lake has always been a walking pathway. You talk to any of the residents around there, they want it. What many people do not know is that it is also a designated outdoor classroom for the students of GC Houston Public School. The students use it in the fall and in the spring all the time. They go out, they do lots of experiments and monitoring around the lake, and you do not want people riding around it. What most people do not know is that there's also only one way in and one way out of Fairy Lake. It's not a route. You can't get anywhere else unless you go across somebody else's property. There's one way in, one way out. It's not a shortcut anywhere. It's not a shortcut to the school because the school is fenced off. So I will, as I said, I will not support this. We asked that the REACT committee determine what to do with this. The REACT committee said walkway, not a bike path. So I hope you will support what the committee recommended because you asked for it. Thank you.
Further comments? Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also am not supportive, but my take on it is I disagree with a lot of elements in the staff report, but fundamentally, if you were to read the most recent tourist brochure for the town of Saugeen Shores, if you saw the description there of Fairy Lake, and I'm going to confess I meant to grab one so that I could read it to you, it's a tiny little paragraph, but it talks about this oasis of calm and peace and take a walk, sit there, look at the lake. It's all about a peaceful environment. It's branding. And I think we're the envy of a lot of other communities across Ontario for all of the wonderful opportunities we have within Saugeen Shores to have these special kinds of things. We've got a phenomenal waterfront. Then we have, places like Jubilee Park, Nodwell Park, Fairy Lake Park. All of these places are destinations that in and of themselves, they don't always need a whole lot of embellishment, but they should be celebrated and recognized for what they are. And Fairy Lake is different than any other park. So to describe it as a trail that's similar to what's in Nodwell Park or in George Marion Park, for example, interesting. Nodwell Park, if you were to do that loop, it's very open. It's got a little bit of a grade every now and again, but the sight lines are incredible there. If you were to ride your bike around Fairy Lake, the grade is up and down. There's blind corners. It's even though it is, 2.5 meters or however wide it was created, there's still not a lot of opportunity there for if somebody has a stroller. There isn't a lot of opportunity there for movement off the trail to assist with somebody passing because you got a steep slope down perhaps to the water or you've got a steep slope up on the other side. It's a different kind of path or trail there. Also, considering that it's similar to what's at George Marion Park, sort of gave me a bit of a smile. The trail at George Marion Park actually was something that I was quite vocal about. The reason for that being put in there fundamentally was because the ground's really uneven and it was really difficult to get in there either walking or with a stroller or anything. So that little loop, which is basically just around the playground equipment that's there, it's 1.5 meters wide. That was what was in the specs. That's pretty much what it was built for or built to. It doesn't go anywhere, and you certainly wouldn't necessarily see that as a big bike trail. So it's a different kind of trail there too, and it was really to provide access in at a level sort of a level place for people who had some mobility issues or for somebody with a stroller. So I just think that Fairy Lake is this place that we should celebrate, and we're about to create this incredible environment there. The little floating platform is in there now. We've got some trail upgrades. We're about to create some interesting plantings around the lake. We're going to put another fountain in there. Hopefully there'll be some small improvements in the area around the pavilion to make that more comfortable and welcoming to people at a show or at a concert or a wedding or something down there. We're doing things to encourage wildlife to go back in there, and that's worth protecting. And it's been mentioned about the Accessibility Committee and the Recreation and Active Transportation Committee already. The Heritage Committee has also taken a look at Fairy Lake, and in fact we'll be working towards how we can start to include some cultural or natural heritage sites on the list that we create for the community, which are basically lists which celebrate heritage elements. So I don't think that this is the place to do education. I would rather, if we're going to put up some signs about sharing trails, let's get them on the trails that need them. And I guess the thing about people riding their bikes in places where pedestrians walk, well, all you have to do is look around Port Elgin and Southampton. You see bikes on the sidewalk all the time. And the unfortunate thing is the bike has the road, and they're taking advantage of the sidewalk. Has somebody who's a pedestrian or somebody, a dad or a mom with a stroller, you've got the sidewalk. What are you supposed to then use the road? So I think this is an area where we can be very protective of a route. It's also been mentioned at a number of the public meetings that people from the hospital take advantage of this site for a little bit of respite from whatever they're dealing with at the hospital. So, you know, in the end, I guess it would be nice if they walk down the street, come down that stone walkway that we're building, which will be beautiful, and they have a nice little respite from whatever other thing that they're doing. I think this is an area worth protecting, and we should be branding it, and we should be seeing it as the park that it is and the gem that it is. I also just want to end by saying I happened to be up doing something near the fire hall today, and somebody stopped their car and they said they'd been talking to somebody involved with the splash pad construction behind the fire hall, and whoever they were talking to on the splash pad committee had said they couldn't believe how busy the park was. And you know, those of us that use that park, and I know many of us from here are there fairly regularly, we know that that's true. It's also true that a lot of people who use that park also then wander down Victoria Street, and we spent some money a couple of years ago to improve the grade on that sidewalk to make it a little more easy for people with accessibility issues or with a stroller. They wander down Victoria Street and head into Fairy Lake. It's a boom boom, and you know, you throw in the museum there. This is a major attraction, and it's very well used. I think we should be doing what we can do to have people explore Fairy Lake more, feel it, experience it, breathe it, smell it, all that kind of good stuff, and we should be protecting it. I just don't think that bikes need to be in there too, just because it's not that kind of place. So thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Minaj.
And what's interesting here is I'm sure that the Director of Community Services has been all the way around the circle in her mind as to whether to allow bikes or not to allow bikes, and whether to build the trail to suit the needs or not. And there's been some eloquent discussion here as to what the end result should be. And I think that what I'd like to say is, my hope is that if in fact this is defeated as a bike trail, and it sounds like it might, that we provide cyclists with an opportunity to shelter their bicycles maybe and lock them up, and that they get to disembark and they get to walk around the trail. We're not going to, if we do anything, I hope that if we say no to bikes using the trail, that we don't say no to the cyclists. Come down here and check it out, leave your bike here, and provide them with an opportunity to do that.
Okay, Councillor McMahon.
I had to speak to it. I had a few questions actually to you, Mr. Mayor, to Jane, and the Director of Community Services, Jane. This new trail system that's being constructed in progress right now, a few questions about it. Number one, what was the grant amount that was received for this work, and what percentage of the grant funding was for trail redevelopment? And how wide is the new trail in feet? I think it's 2 meters, 6 feet plus, six something. And I say, what percentage of the trail has been completed? So those 3 questions, and then I just had a couple comments, but maybe if you could deal with those questions, Jane.
Got them all down. The grant was $49,000, and council agreed for an additional $51,000 for a total project for Fairy Lake. $23,000 was allocated for the trail itself, and at this point I think it's at about 85% done. I wasn't down there today, but I was there on Friday. The trail is, for the most part, 2 meters wide, and we were able to put a 2-meter trail in there without having any damage or taking down any additional trees. That fit nicely along the existing footprint, which the existing footprint, about 75% of it was, I'll call it Goat's Path, which really wasn't a trail amongst individual homes along Matheson Park. Have I answered all of your questions?
My only, one of my main concerns, I suppose, removing cyclists from the public park, one of the comments our director made was bylaw enforcement is critical during prime summer months. And historically, those resorts have been focused on higher traffic locations, including downtown core, main beaches. I guess my main concern here, perhaps, is are we opening up? Is it really a significant issue? I was at the Fair Lake public meeting, as was our Vice Deputy Mayor and Councillor Grace last week. 25, 30 people showed up, and by the way, our Community Service Department did an excellent job. Jane and Frank Burrows and Victoria Serta made a nice presentation. Not one person at that particular forum made any comment about removing bikes from Fair Lake, which surprised me a little bit. It was an opportunity. At every opportunity, we talked about snapping turtles and docking, and Frank talked about the trail being constructed, Frank Burrows. So I was surprised. I thought I'd hear more from people who were adamantly opposed to cyclists around Fair Lake. I didn't hear a comment. I'm just wondering if we are opening up a new can of worms for bylaw enforcement for a problem that I asked Jane confirm this. I asked her how many complaints there were in the last 5 years about cyclists around Fair Lake, and the answer was zero. The answer was zero. I asked Frank Burrows, the parks manager, how many complaints he's received since he started here over a year ago. The answer was zero. So I don't know if we're doing this for the right reasons. It's 6-7 feet wide. People will now be able to pass one another with a stroller and a bike, in my view. So I've heard from both sides on this one. I've heard from people from Southampton in particular saying it should be removed. I've heard other people, since the word that we're removing cyclists saying, "My goodness, why are we doing it? Why are we going there?" So I don't know. I'm just wondering if we should be trying on a one-year trial basis this trail, Mr. Mayor. I don't know how many council members have been over to look at the trail system. I've walked it. Quite a nice new trail that's been put in there. So I'm not sure it's in my mind that it's that big of an issue, but I just wonder if we should be trying this on a one-year trial basis, perhaps, just to see, in fact, if it works. Anyways, that's it. Thank you.
Any further comments? Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not terribly worked up on this one way or the other. I just think that it's fun to ban things. It's fun to prohibit stuff, I guess, on one hand. But I think we should consider, the efficacy or our success rate at altering people's behavior via municipal bylaw. People aren't supposed to ride their bikes on the sidewalks, but they do. People are supposed to have their dogs on leashes, but they don't. People are supposed to stoop and scoop behind their dogs, and they don't do that very often. People aren't supposed to park in no parking spaces, but they do that pretty regularly. Municipal bylaw as a mechanism to stop people from doing things you don't want them to do is not a great tool. Not super effective. And that's because people don't really respond very well, I think, to prohibitions. And I think whether you have a bylaw that says they should ride on Fair Lake Trail or not, they probably will anyway. And then what you end up doing is dragging the municipality into disputes between individuals. And often when the municipality gets dragged into disputes between individuals, it's more about two individuals not liking each other much than it is about any particular bylaw that's been violated. So I just think that I don't know. I think we could look at other things that we could do to alter people's behavior, to affect their behavior, to get them to do the things we want them to do. And one of the options is what the Director of Community Services is proposing. I think it's reasonable that you could look at that. If after a number of months we find that there are a large number of negative interactions between bicyclers and pedestrians, we can revisit prohibition if that's the only solution. But I think that prohibition ought to be the final solution to a problem, the very last solution that we choose, because it is so dramatic and so drastic a thing to do. And so, like I say, I'm not super worked up if bicyclers are banned off the Fair Lake Trail. Ultimately, it's not going to break my heart desperately, but I think we should. I think it's reasonable and more moderate to consider attempting to get people to share the trail effectively, all those uses, because they're going to use the trail in all those ways anyway, whether we declare a ban here today or not. So why don't we work with them, try some signage, try some education, try making sure that they can try some physical barriers or whatever to try to make sure that that interaction can happen safely and successfully and effectively, so that on the ground we get what we actually want, which is people not to get hurt, and pedestrians to be able to enjoy that peaceful and tranquil space in the way we want them to, and actually get that outcome. Because I think we can actually get that outcome better through different means than a ban. But if it comes right down to it, and we absolutely can't, and I'm wrong, then we can always ban it 6 months from now, after a summertime where we've seen a lot of negative interactions. We can always take that measure. That's a measure that's always in our hands to take. But I don't think we've tried everything yet, and we could. So I'm going to support the director's recommendation, and if it fails, then I'll probably end up supporting the ban ultimately, because there's no other option. But I'd like us to give it a chance. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Don, go ahead. No, I think we've heard.
Last one, Mr. Mayor. Lots of talk, as Councillor Mayette said. You've heard the South Anthony, you heard the Port Elgin, you heard the I care, I don't care. Council asked the committee to make a recommendation. We left it to the committee to make a recommendation. The committee made the recommendation. If we're not going to follow what the recommendation was by the committee, why have committees? Why ask for it? Thank you.
Okay, I think we've had enough discussion on this, and I'm going to call the question here. So the recommendation is that council, I'll read it again so everybody, the council endorses staff recommendation to promote Ferry Lake as shared usage, and that a campaign and suggested signage be erected educating cyclists to disembark when approaching pedestrians. All in favor? Opposed? That's defeated. So we'll move on to the next item then, which is communications petitions for committee of the whole action. And the first one is, as you see, there's a letter from the Saugeen First Nation requesting policing. And as I mentioned earlier, the deputy mayor, the board chair, and myself and the CAO have met with the chief and band administrator once, and the band administrator a second time about this. One of the requests that we made to them was that they make a request in a formal manner like this letter. So we have this letter before us tonight, and I think for Committee of the Whole Action, I think it's a great opportunity to hopefully partner with our community and neighbors to the north and share services. And I think there just needs to be some negotiation going on, and I would say that for the most part should be done by the chief and probably the CAO to get some type of a proposal back to us so that the board and council can consider how we do that. But I'll take any questions on this, and we're going to need some direction. Yeah, to be clear, it's the chief of police that I was referring to. Councillor Dave Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was glad to hear, I have not been involved in this, by the way, even though I'm a member of the Police Services Board, but I'm glad to hear that any proposal is determined that it would be cost neutral and that we wouldn't be taking on a financial burden, and that's very important. Two things that pieces of information that I think should be carefully considered, and that being, and the OPP are very good at keeping records and the number of calls. Have we any access to the OPP's experience in policing on the Saugeen First Nation and the frequency of calls and because I mean that's ultimately the cost basis. And well, do we? Or can
no,
we
have. These are very preliminary, Dave, and I think that's probably a good question to ask as we proceed through these things. Through the chief, to the chief, if you have some input to him, Chief Rivet. But sorry, I apologize. Chief Rivet did attend the second meeting with the band administrator with the deputy mayor, myself, and the CAO, and so there was just some pretty general discussions. I think as we get down closer to it, those specific questions can be answered. But it was really, I think this is at the point to say, in principle, would you allow the chief and the CAO to proceed with negotiations to come up with some? Because we felt clearly that chief is the one with the expertise in policing.
Certainly he is, and he knows the costing aspects of it. The other thing that concerns me just a little bit is the fact that the OPP, we all know, is their policing agency at the moment. The OPP, I've been led to believe, are quite reticent to give up territory that they currently have. Their mandate or their desires are to expand, and they've been taking on municipal police forces and expanding their network, and not very often do they cede territory. Now, maybe this is a territory that they are willing and ready to secede from. I'm not sure, but we don't want to get into a situation where that good relationship that you referred to earlier, Mr. Mayor, is put in jeopardy. That we want to maintain our good relationship with our neighboring OPP detachments.
That was, Dave, Councilor Mayette, that was a question that was raised also during those discussions, and like I say, I think we'll get some better answers to that when we get closer to it. But it was a question there's probably a protocol here that we need to deal with your current service provider. Councilor Minaj?
Mr. Mayor, then, I know you're not in favor of using a crystal ball tonight, but so is this something then we think will be back in time for 2018? It's revenue neutral, but it would still have to have some sort of budgetary process that explains how we would interact. Is that something that's likely to come back this year, or is this another year out, do you think?
I think to answer it, and be honest, my hope would be fairly quick, fairly short, before the end of this year, and I think that is certainly the desire of the Chief Anaquat and his band administrator, that we see if we can come up. It may not be work, but to see if we can come up with a proposal very quickly, I think. Councillor Madison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with what you said. I look forward to a partnership with Saugeen First Nation, and I agree that we should direct our CAO to continue conversations with that and come back with a report to council.
Okay, so then I guess what we'll do, and I think I just add the Chief of Police, led by the Chief of Police and the CAO, if you don't mind that. So I think what we need is a direction, a motion to that effect, and it's been moved by the chair, seconded by Councillor Dave Mayette. Any further discussion on it? I think this is a great opportunity. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. So the next item on the agenda then is there's a request from Jill Taylor for exemptions to section 14.1 of the procedural bylaw. It's there before you, and I'll take some direction from committee. Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
I would move that we accept Ms. Taylor's request.
You accept it?
That we approve the request.
Okay. Seconded by Councillor Rich. Any discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I would also support this. One of the points that mayors in our region made during the 2013 Joint Review Panel hearing was that they felt like they didn't hear sufficient information from people who were opposed to the proposed Kincardine DGR. And so I think, this is, OPG has presented new information to the minister, as you heard tonight. And I think, to be fair, we need to, I hope we would allow SOS Great Lakes to present a timely response. I will be supporting the motion.
Yeah, I have no trouble with it. My difficulty always with, they're here, asking questions and making statements where we have absolutely no power to affect any change in this process. None, other than as a commenting agency, as SOS or anybody. And so we often, it's something that sometimes, to me, we're providing a forum for somebody to come here and speak about something that we have no ability to change. And I have no trouble with that. We can listen to those people, but it can be an irritant when what is the next thing? I mean, what is the next thing? Because there's some very divisive social issues that we have absolutely nothing that we can do about, that we could have somebody here using that as a forum to spout those things. And I don't think that is what the council is for. So I just make that comment. So there is the motion, then. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. So the next item then on the agenda is information reports. There's 4 of them there. Goderich and the Stavis Street intersection. If anybody has any questions about, sorry, did I miss one? Oh, sorry. There's 7 communications, yes. Questions on those? Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
I just wanted to highlight the Southampton Town Hall Ad Hoc Committee minutes. The consultant that's been hired to come up with some concept ideas for a potential twinning of the library and the Southampton Town Hall. The Southampton Library and the Southampton Town Hall was in Saugeen Shores on Thursday and had some very productive meetings during the day. Some of us were involved in those. But then we had a public meeting at night, and it was pretty well attended. I think there were 3 or 4 of us there, and a lot of interest, of course. But I just wanted to highlight that there is a survey which you can access via the town's website to make some comments about the idea. And also, I believe that the next time, or perhaps the next time, that the consultant will also be interested in talking with council in person. But it was a very, very good forum. Thank you.
Any further comments to those 7? None. So now we're down to 4 information reports. And I'll ask the first one, information report, if the director wants to speak to them, or if not, we'll just take questions. And any questions on number 1, information to Goddard Street and Gustavus Street intersection improvement? Councillor Minaj.
Yeah, not very popular with me. The loss of the parking spots, albeit there is some advantage to creation of a couple of new ones, and it was in a master plan that talked about how to do this. I fundamentally am opposed. I've lived here for long enough and driven those 2 streets for long enough to tell you that those left turn lanes are not required. They're simply not required. If anything, the westerly direction of Gustavus Street has an advanced green, so does the southerly direction of Goderich Street at the Gustavus Street area has an advanced green. If traffic behaves itself properly, and if we put the parking spaces back, then they actually couldn't pull around to the right, and it would function just as well. There is no left turn requirement to go Gustavus Street west from a northerly direction on Goderich Street. No one ever does it, the odd one, but hundreds do not. The left turn advanced greens are working very well. If the loss of parking is just not worth making those intersection improvements, in my opinion. And who am I? I'm just a person that's on council and happens to live in the area and drives it almost every day. I can tell you that my hope was we could have gotten more leverage or more advantage from a one-way street system, but it seems that that's not in the works. So I would encourage my peers on council to send this back and say that report is old and is no longer the way to do business. Those loss of parking spots that we're going to create there is going to be huge. We'll be down to 1 accessible spot and 1 parking spot on the north side, on the west side of Goderich Street around the Meridian Bank, and 4 or 5 other businesses there with no on-street parking, just 2 spots, if we can maintain that. So I don't know that the full impact of this decision is realized, but we've tried to bring it up repeatedly, and I've tried to bring it up with 3 different people who were in the Director of Public Works and Engineering seat over the last 3 years. So I'm disappointed that it's come to this, and I think that it's a mistake. Thank you.
Okay. Comments to any further comments to it? Oh yeah, sorry, Councillor Mike Mag.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just through you to the to Director of Public Works, Amanda. I just wondering, losing 3 spots in our downtown is always a concern for me too. I read your comment in here that Chamber and BIA representatives seem to be understanding of the reason. I didn't see where they approve of, but understanding of. My question, I guess, Amanda, is what, if any, spaces have we added to our downtown area in the last 2 to 3 years that you're aware of? If you could highlight for me. And secondly, are you always on the lookout for options for new additional parking spaces? Maybe not right on Main Street, obviously, but say within a block or so of Main Street. Are you continuously looking at ways to maybe try and find replacement for losing 3 spots? Let's gain back another 3 or 4 or 5 someplace else. And so that's a two-part question. What have we added in the last 2 or 3 years? And are you always on the lookout for new spaces?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. When I first came to the position, I walked downtown with Councillor Minaj and Len Perdue, and we looked at different ones, and actually over the spring we tested a few out to see if we could get a truck and a car to fit before we do this line painting to see where we could get. The easiest one we found is the one in the alley between the barber shop and Optimize, to put the temporary bollards out and put that new parking space in. But there is an approved parking plan for Port Elgin, and that's what I'll bring to council next year to be included in the 2018 budget. At the same time, there is opportunity for suggestions to that plan. We can bring that first to committee and look for your input on other places. There are different things. There's Bricker Street might be an opportunity for some parking. There's different ideas that we have down in that area as well. Sort of take it one block either side of Green and see what we can do. Happy to bring back the discussion on that already approved street plan, see what we can do. For your very first question, there was a parking lot added on Elgin Street behind Rosina's. So that was put in, and it absorbed the difference in parking from the original parking that was downtown versus this one where the reduction in parking.
Deputy Mayor Charbonneau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think there has been some historic acceptance from the BIA in particular that this intersection change needs to happen. I think there was a resolution passed not very long ago by the BIA that to that effect. I just wanted to make real clear, though, your last paragraph that staff and council have met with the chamber representative and BIA representatives to discuss these impacts. What meetings are we talking about there? When did those meetings occur? It's the AND council that I'm just not clear on. Could you? There's been a number of meetings on this subject, and I just want to make sure that all of these guys, particularly the chamber and BIA, particularly the BIA, who have some members in the core who have been concerned about parking changes we made earlier at Green Street and could equally be affected by these changes because they're on the same block, that they're fully cognizant of the fact that this is about to occur, and that what I would not like to see is for us to proceed with this and them to become aware only once we've proceeded with it that this change has happened, and then we hear from them or hear their input at that phase, because these intersection changes date back to 2012, right? That's when we initially made this decision. So it's been 5 years, and there may not be an awareness that this is. There may be belief that this is in abeyance and won't occur. So could you just drill down on for me when these discussions happened and who all have we spoken to, and who are the members of council who were involved, I guess?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, these conversations and these meetings were prior to my arrival. So with talking to my predecessor, there over the years that they've been discussions that have happened that way. I do know of the one where the motion was brought forward to direct staff to look at parking improvements for downtown. That was, Councillor Minaj was there, and I'm not sure if you were at that one or not, but I know of that one, and then, like I said, it's through my predecessor and historical things. If directed by council, we can circulate the businesses again, but I stress that it's the safety need that's there. We have a traffic study, we have an agreement with MTO, and these left turn lanes are supposed to be there, and it's our job to balance safety and business, and in my opinion, it's important to put these left turn lanes in.
I certainly don't dispute the need for the intersection changes, but it's concerning that I mean, they may not be aware at all. This is going to, even the BIA hasn't been told formally that this is going to happen this summer, or maybe right away. And so I would really encourage you to call them now and tell them that change is going to happen, and the chamber as well, and get that input out of the way now so that you can at least advise them that it's about to take place before it takes place. I would hate to have the work happen and only then, is everybody aware? Because as part of that balancing act, communication is critical. So, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so, Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's not on the parking issue. I just wanted to say thank you to Jessica for the report on the accelerator space, and it's a great initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go down these one at a time and see if that's all right. That's fine. Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you. Mine relates to number 2 on the list. I appreciate the report saying that no change is needed in terms of left turn at Goderich and Ivings Drive. What I have some concern about at that intersection, and it's been voiced in the past, when the Max development, Max Milk or Circle K development came into play, they have an intersection or an access to Goderich Street that is very close to that intersection, and we're supposed to be during site plan approval, it was supposed to be the in and out thing, very similar to what's at the Independent or at Shoppers Drug Mart, which really did stop you from turning left off the highway into that, or when you're coming out, turning left onto Goderich Street. However, I'm not too sure that what actually got installed has realized that. So I'm just curious to know if that's something that because to me that's a problem at that intersection. It's not about the left turn. It's about how close that access is to the intersection and the way that people are using it in the way that it's not supposed to be. Because the little sort of triangle that's in between the ramp in and the ramp out, it doesn't at all stop you from not driving right over it, because it's only a little rumble strip. It doesn't hurt your car. It doesn't stop you. And it was intended to. So is that an issue at that intersection that we should be perhaps addressing?
I'm not aware of the site plan agreement on that one. I believe the site plan is complete, but I can follow up and see what that the island is supposed to be versus what's there. It may be what exactly was approved, and that would be part of a site plan agreement.
Well, I'd be curious, just through you, to know if the police have had any issues there, because it certainly is very close to the intersection.
Okay, so anything on the design guidelines? Sorry. Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I was one of the. I guess I did raise it back at budget time, and there's a letter from Jim Klein on file too, and I've talked to several Bruce Power employees about the left-hand turn. So I appreciate Amanda coming forth, council saying it's not really required right now, but maybe by 2026, people coming home from Bruce Power need to be aware that someday it could be a left-hand turn at Ivings Drive. So that's a good thing. But Mr. Mayor, if I may ask this quick question, let me take a sec. Amanda, could you just tell me about the pedestrian activated crosswalks at Clarendon and Catherine Street, if they're the status of those? I know it's a little bit off topic, but just could I indulge in that? Just one quick question, Mr. Mayor, where they're at?
They were part of the 2003 traffic study as well, that were part of this, and we received the agreements today from MTO to upgrade them, so they will be upgraded hopefully before school starts.
Oh, perfect.
Both
Thank
of
you,
them.
Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dave Mayap.
Mayor, through you, Amanda, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm sensing here is that you can't put an advanced light without a left-hand turn lane. Is that a designated left-hand turn lane? Because at Ivings Drive, an advanced flashing green or an arrow green to get people out of the highway and into the plaza would do so much to move that traffic along. But do you have to put in a reconstructed designated left-hand turning lane for that to happen? That's my question.
Are you, Mr.? No, you don't. You can have either. So a dedicated left turn lane is warranted when you have vehicles coming at you of a certain volume, or in a time delay, or a backup of a certain length. And you can have two lanes where one is a shared through or left with an advance under different warranting. But I think that's there already. I think it already has an advance.
There's no advance turning left on Ivans Drive? No, there isn't. There needs to be, though. It's the worst intersection in town, especially during the Bruce Power rush hour. I don't know if it's the worst. Neil might have some worse ones for me, but it's a bad intersection, and the left-hand turning, people, all you need is one person that forgets to put their signal on, and it gets people frustrated, and I think we need to look at a left-hand turn signal there. Flash an advanced screen.
Councillor Minaj.
I need your permission to speak to the Catherine Street crosswalk then. If it was the previous Director of Public Works didn't want the crosswalk to be at Catherine Street. He wanted to move it back one street, and that's where the improvements to the sidewalk were made on Eugenie Street. So we should be revisiting, and we should be looking at the reasons why we would want it at Catherine Street, because clearly the last director said no, it should be moved.
Thank you. So we will move on to the next design guidelines. Any questions? If there's none, I know Jessica and this would like to speak to the next report. Go ahead, Jessica.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to run through the information report, which is identifying an innovative opportunity for municipally owned space at the back of 559 Godrich Street, formerly the BEC, Business Enterprise Center, is sitting vacant. I'm, through the information report, explaining the opportunity for this space to act as an accelerator center for the nuclear industry. Understanding the requirement of a local presence to secure contracts with Bruce Power, this space can act as an opportunity to land safely, to land securely, to have more time to be able to focus, secure those contracts, build local relationships, and get their feet on the ground. So through this space, we could offer the month-to-month leasing opportunity, which means a revenue opportunity for the municipality, but finally being positioned where it is with the Chamber of Commerce offers nuclear industry providers the opportunity for strong networking in our business community. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. This is great news. I just want to. We met with another very major company that we made a presentation to, and we do this very regularly. Jessica does this fairly regularly, but I sat in with it, and it was when they left, they were thoroughly impressed with what our economic development people are doing in our community. So we need to be congratulating all of them. Any questions on this particular item? If not, then we'll get a motion to adjourn. Councillor Madison and Deputy Mayor Charbonneau, all in favor? We'll adjourn for 10 minutes.